Can you guys see that?
Yes. Yes. Winning.
Lovely. And I assume you don't need closed caption.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, got it. Got it. Okay, good. What I want to talk about today, if that's okay, are a couple of things, and we may or may not get through all of them. You say we have an hour?
Mhm.
Got it. Fair enough. Um, you may want to record, if you ever play this back, play it back at about a third speed, because I tend to speak fairly rapidly, but I'll go through, and we don't have to cover everything as long as we get a chance to cover some of the things that are most relevant. What I want to do today is talk about what I got wrong about depression, what I've been wrong about. And I've been at this for goodness knows how long, my entire career. And it's been in the last, oh, maybe 10 years, at most 15, that I've started paying attention to the things that I believed all along that I think probably aren't going to turn out to be true. First thing is that depression, I've always assumed was a disease if it was biologically caused, and if not, it's a disorder. But over the last 10, 15 years, I've swung around to the notion that at least non-psychotic unipolar depression is neither a disease nor a disorder, but rather an evolved adaptation. And we had the sense that depression was driven by underlying biological causes. It was a disease, classic medicalization of it. And if it was not a disease, at least a disorder, you get functional impairment, you get and a reduced sense of subjective well-being. And the notion of the Diagnostic Statistics Manual is if something feels bad, it must be bad for you. We also have the notion that depression is the single most prevalent psychiatric disorder. Lifetime prevalence about 16%. It's about half as common in males as in females. And the notion that the majority of people that ever get depressed are going to have recurrent depression with episodic multiple episodes, about 85% of all folks, and that each episode may well increase the risk for subsequent episodes, something they call kindling or sensitization. Turns out that's probably not the case. Around 2010, I started talking with a fellow named Paul Andrews, an evolutionary biologist. Now, I met Paul first socially. At some party, he was dating a friend of mine, and we started chatting at the party. And he was saying that he was interested in depression. He had been working on a manuscript with a colleague, psychiatric colleague. He was at that time doing a postdoc at Virginia Commonwealth with Ken Kendler. And he wondered would I be willing to give it a reading. And it's the kind of thing you do at a party. And you're on your second glass of wine, say, of course, send it on to me. And he sent me this thing that was just huge, humongous long. And I read it, and it was very scholarly. It was very nice, very well done, but it was just absolutely wrong. Everything he said was just off kilter. It's like the guy may have been a terrific evolutionary biologist. He didn't know anything about depression. And I started out, he'd asked for feedback, and I gave him some feedback and indicated basically I thought it was just extremely well researched, et cetera. But I tried to be gentle about the notion that he didn't get depression at all. But he asked me if I didn't I think I actually said that to him at the time, but he asked me where I thought he ought to send it. I said, well, I've usually done is sent anything I've written to the place I most want it to be published. That doesn't mean it's going to go in there, but it means I'll at least get good reviews. They won't take that long, etc. And an article that long about the only thing in psychology I can imagine that would even consider it was Psychological Review, which I've never published in. You have to be that's the first string article to go into. But I suggested that, thinking it'll be turned around fast. He won't have to be quite so gentle. They won't be so gentle about it. Well, it turns out it got in, and it was published in 2009. Andrews and Thompson, his psychiatric colleague. And the basic premise there was that depression was neither disease nor disorder, but an evolved adaptation. And it works in the following way. To an evolutionary biologist, just because something feels bad doesn't mean it's bad for you. I keep getting little signs to admit, do I need to do that? You guys got that. Just because something failed, it doesn't mean it needs to feel bad for you. And for about the first 2, 3 years I was interacting with Paul, my sense was bright guy, but just dead wrong. And then we started talking more about probably about the fifth year in. I was up visiting in Hamilton where he's at McMaster, and he gave me an article by a group headed by Crook, a group of evolutionary biologists. And it basically comes down to this. Squids eat sea bass. I mean, sea bass eat squids, and squids, by and large, as best we can tell, prefer not to be eaten. You put them in a tank together, you put them in some place you can watch, and they'll go through particular consistent patterns. This Sea bass will swim around. They'll have an orientation. If they see the school of squid, they'll start a pursuit. As they get closer to number three, they'll open the mouth, and if they're lucky, they capture, they get a lunch out of that. Squids, on the other hand, go through their own progression from light, dark banding. Then they'll start changing colors to fit the background. If they notice that there's a sea bass in the vicinity, they'll have weak mantle contractions, fin odorlation, etc. And eventually, if push comes to shove, they'll release ink and hopefully swim off in the cloud of dark. What Crook and colleagues did was do surgery on the squids, and they had quartets of squids, four groups of squids in each of the quartets. And what they would do, the two on the left, they didn't do surgery on. One was no surgery, no anesthesia, and the second one was surgery under anesthesia. And I'm getting some questions. Was there somebody who wanted to say something? Or we're okay? Okay. The second one in, they had no surgery, but under anesthesia. The groups on the right were maimed. They had one of their swimmers cut off. And the third one from the left, the eye, had the swimmer cut off without anesthesia. And the one to the far right had its swimmer cut off under anesthesia. They put those quartets of squids repeatedly, different quartets, in a tank with the hungry sea bass and painted and counted which ones were most likely to survive. If you didn't have the surgery, the two columns on the left, you were most likely to survive. Most of them weren't eaten first. If you're in the two columns on the right, you were more likely to get eaten. That's the cost of injury. But notice there's a benefit of the nociceptive sensitization. If you can feel the pain in the third column, you're less likely to get eaten if you're maimed than if you can't. Bottom line on the far right is that pain hurts, but it keeps you alive. And when we start thinking in those terms, the question is, why do we have pain? And anybody that's followed the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the great trilogy of films coming out of Sweden, knows that the heroine's Frankensteinish half-brother, who has no pain receptors, she's ended up able to conquer him in a duel to the death because he can't feel pain. She can staple his feet to something. She leaves him at the mercy of the motorcycle gang. And by and large, pain hurts, but it keeps it alive. It keeps us from doing additional damage to tissues. Now we start thinking in those terms. We start thinking about whether or not depression is, if it's not necessarily a disease, is a disorder. And to, again, an evolutionary biologist, negative affects, anxiety, the upper left, anger, the lower right, pain, the upper right, depression, the lower right, all organize what's called a whole body response. In anxiety, if you have the sense that you're under threat, that you have a perception of risk, you get physiological arousal, you get desire to avoid, to escape, to avoid the situation. If it's anger, you also get a sense of a violation of a should, a sense of challenge. You get physiological arousal and but here that's a behavioral approach. You might attack or at least say something catty on the internet. Upper right, pain, we just talked about. You get a perception of discomfort, heightened nociceptive receptors, and you get protective behaviors. You cushion your injured tissues. And depression on the lower right somehow escaped attention for a number of years, centuries in effect. But there's the expectation of non-gratification in response to a loss. You get physiological arousal, but it's experienced as a sense of fatigue, and you get a behavioral inertia. It's response initiation deficit. Well, that's anything but disorder. If these were disorders, they wouldn't have these discrete different clusters. And curiously enough, each of the clusters, each of the whole body responses that gets triggered by different kinds of challenges from the environment, prepared our ancestors for the most likely to be effective response, the highest probability effective response to that given kind of challenge. You can't imagine how that can work out unless there's an intelligent creator. Can't be very intelligent, or we wouldn't have the blind spot in our eye, or at least the process of evolutionary natural selection. And evolution is the one thing in the biological system that can create order in biological organisms. Ergo, evolved adaptation for negative affects. Remember, I mentioned that depression is the most prevalent of the psychiatric disorders. Well, we've already indicated that I'm not sure, at least that I believe that non-psychotic, I know I don't believe that non-psychotic unipolar disorder is actually a disorder. I think it's involved adaptation. And it turns out it's a lot more prevalent than we ever realized. If you do the look at the marvelous study that Alston Casby and Tammy Moffat have done in Dunedin that they followed. Their sample birth cohort all picked up in the same year in Dunedin, New Zealand, followed every couple of years with interviews, evaluations, etc. The sample now is up about age 45. And Tammy was kind enough to share with me the percentages. And if you notice, slightly more than half of all adults in their sample have had one or more diagnosable episodes of major depression. That's 3 to 5 times higher than anything we've estimated based on our retrospective epidemiological surveys. And of course, the sample isn't done yet. They've still got potential for more first onsets to come. And if you look at the onsets they have had, the largest number of people that have gotten depressed, it's about 22.5% of the overall sample, have only one episode. It drops to 15% have had two, seven, just under eight have had three, 3.5 have had four, et cetera, et cetera. That's not a bimodal distribution. If only a subset of the population was at elevated risk for getting depressed, and especially if any episode of depression increased the risk of having other episodes, you should get a distribution that's high on the left, comes down in the middle, and goes back up on the right. That's not what we see. The best data available in the field suggests that whether it's bad luck, bad things that happen, et cetera, it's not a highly recurrent disorder. It's a very common disorder, but not highly recurrent. As a matter of fact, it's so common that it's what an evolutionary biologist would call species typical, meaning that it's not just a subset of the population that gets it. Anybody could get it. Anybody could have it. And we know from grief, which didn't used to be counted as an episode of depression, which for some reason, but now I think is coming into the nomenclature, we know that virtually anybody would have a grief experience if they lost somebody really close to them. It's something that we're wired up to get, not something that's unique to a subset of the population, but something that's there for virtually any of us, like pain, like anxiety. G. Instead of thinking of depression as a disease with underlying biological causation, certainly some instances of depression are. You get a pituitary tumor, you're going to get Cushing's disease, you're going to blast it with cortisol, and at least half of the folks with the pituitary tumor are going to go on to have an episode of depression within a couple of months. However, biological anomalies can either be cause or consequence. If you lose somebody close to you, your cortisol level is going to go up. You don't need the pituitary tumor. So a psychological event can drive biological anomalies. Jerome Wakefield has proposed a two-pronged definition of disease, which I think the field is moving in the direction of adopting. The makers of DSM aren't quite there yet, but they're approaching each time they revise it, they're getting closer to that. And the two-pronged definition is a disease is said to occur when you get a breakdown and an adaptation, an evolved adaptation that then causes dysfunction. I'll give you two examples there. If your aorta bursts, if your heart, the arteries leading into the heart burst, you're going to die very rapidly. That's a breakdown in adaptation. The heart was designed to be a pump, it's worked very well, but if the aorta goes haywire on you, it's going to burst, you're going to die. However, a very, very small percentage of the human race have the heart on the right side of the body. That's a breakdown and an adaptation. That's not the way it's designed to be, but it doesn't cause any dysfunction. Those fields have as long a life expectancy. They're as likely to reproduce, have children, grandchildren, etc. So it doesn't cause dysfunction. That would not meet Wakefield's definition of a disease because it does cause dysfunction. It is a breakdown and adaptation, but it does cause dysfunction. Second thing, if it's not a disease, at least it's disorder. And as we talked about just a minute ago, affects coordinate whole body responses. They feel bad, like pain for the squids. They help their ancestors stay alive long enough to be our ancestors. Anxiety coordinates and organizes a coordinated response to threat, anger to challenge, depression to loss. And individuals can feel the difference between them. We talk about that, and it's not hard to pick up clinically. Depression, the single most prevalent disorder, well, it's actually about 3 to 5 times more prevalent than we ever realized, and it may end up being more prevalent still. Some of the best studies, the need and birth cohort study, the study that followed pre-adolescents across the course of adolescence, the Lewinson, Brody et al. Slaughter also found higher rates on the same range. We used to dismiss those things and say, well, they couldn't possibly write. Those folks just don't understand what they're doing. Turns out they're right. I can remember having working on a manuscript a couple of years back that we brought Ron Kessler in on, probably the best epidemiologist in the field, the leader of the uh, National Comorbidity Study, the best of the retrospective epidemiological surveys, and Scott Monroe, who was calling the field's attention to the notion that those birth cohort studies are getting far higher rates, and I expected there to be fireworks. There are no fireworks at all. What Kessler says, of course, he's right. You're better off following a sample prospectively, and you get higher rates. You see, look at our epidemiological surveys. It looks like 20-year-olds have a lot more episodes than 60-year-olds. That's because 60-year-olds don't remember episodes in their 20s. 20-year-olds do. So it was our notion that depression is, number one, increasing over time, and number two, that it's only runs at about 15% of the population is based on inadequate methodology. And even the best of the field at generating the best of those methodologies will agree with that. The notion that it's episodic to recurrent with multiple episodes, again, only about half of the folks that ever got depressed in the Dayton sample go on to become recurrent, and the frequency of those recurrences is a purely linear function. You don't get the bimodality that you would expect. Big changes in the way we've always thought about it. Haven't worked the way into the DSM yet, but the data are just, I think, rock solid. Stop here. Thoughts, questions, anything people want to challenge? Okay. Then what I want to talk about is the thing that Andrews first brought to my attention, which is that what's if depression isn't involved adaptation, at least non-psychotic unipolar depression, what did it evolve to facilitate? And his notion is it evolved to facilitate solving complex problems, i.e., help you ruminate. Now, I was trained to think of rumination as a symptom of depression, maybe even a cause. People get stuck in their own recursive loops and they don't get anywhere. And my additional notion was depression impairs cognitive executive functions because people who are depressed don't seem to be as good at solving math problems, other kind of problems as other people are. Well, it turns out that's probably not true. What Andrews talks about first, he makes several claims about depression. One is that if you see down below, claim number one is that serotonin evolved to modulate the differential allocation of energy across the body and the brain. And I'll come back and talk about some of the reasons why we think that might be true. He thinks it might be true, and that he shared with me. Number one, we know that serotonin, one of the three biogenic amines that historically has been associated with depression. We know that it entered the genome, our species, in the mitochondria well before single cell animals further evolved. We find it in the smallest of bacteria. It came in with the mitochondria as soon as the mitochondria came in. We know there are about 14 different receptors for serotonin, some inhibitory, some excitatory. That's about 3 times more than any other neurotransmitter. That gives it a lot of nuance control. We also know that serotonin, unlike dopamine and norepinephrine, the two other biogenic amines, is an indolamine, not a catecholamine. And indolamines have an indole ring, which means that it can easily deactivate free radicals, and that's going to be important a couple of slides down the line. All cells have to burn glucose. I think they turn to ATP first, but they have to metabolize sugars to produce energy for the cell, and that's how everything works. The problem with metabolizing sugars is it creates free radicals. The oxygen gets freed up by the process. Dolamines deactivate it, turns it into water. Dopamine doesn't do that, norepinephrine does do that, but serotonin does do that. Serotonin also facilitates vasoconstriction or vasodilation. The way you replenish sugars from draw sugars out of the blood for metabolic purposes is to get greater blood flow to a given area, and vasoconstriction, vasodilation facilitates that. And then finally, serotonin is kind of a poor man's insulin. It facilitates absorptions from those nutrients into the blood. Now that's again, you got to wonder how it is that something that's been around that long does all of those different things, and why it would have done all those different things. The second claim that Andrews makes in his 2015 paper is that serotonin transmission is elevated across multiple depressive-like syndromes. I'm going to talk about those three. And when he talks about a depressive-like syndrome, that's a syndrome that's marked by negative affect and anhedonia, and in which you get suppression of growth and reproduction. And there are these two others in addition to clinical depression. If you look on the far left above, you have a euthymic population. They're not sick, they're not starving, they're not clinically depressed, and a certain amount of energy goes to different things. When somebody gets ill, when they get an infection, a lot of energy goes to the immune system. Now, it's not that serotonin sends it there. Serotonin is just a molecule. It can't think. But when the immune system starts burning energy, it needs to have that replaced. And serotonin is the primary neurotransmitter that facilitates all of the things we just talked about. The nuance control, the vasoconstriction, vasodilation, the absorption, that facilitates absorption, et cetera, so that the immune system gets to draw more resources out of the blood to replace what it's already burning up. You get a little attention to cognition. Think about how foggy you get when you have a cold, when you have to go take an exam. You tone down growth. You can grow later on once if you survive the infection. Not much is spent to maintenance, and you're not interested in dating, you're not interested in reproduction. If you're starving, immune system is not particularly activated, cognition not particularly activated. You're thinking about anything, you're thinking about food. Growth is turned down, but a lot of the energy goes to the maintenance of the vital organs, the brain, the heart, the liver, etc. And again, not much devoted to reproduction and growth. If you're clinically depressed, his term for that is melancholia, although I think it probably applies as well to atypical and mixed cases of depression. The energy is going differentially to the brain. It's going to cognition. And then you got to ask, why are you sending energy to the brain? What's the purpose of that? Somebody said sad, et cetera, things going on. And it turns out the energy is going to the brain because when you get depressed, you switch out of type 1 thinking, that's kind of the classic heuristic driven, quick, rapid response to something. For example, you walk into the woods, you see something squiggling on the ground, you pull your foot back before you even realize it's a snake. You have a very quick automatic response to it. Probably doesn't even go to the cortex to get there. But if you have a more complicated problem to solve, you switch into what's called type 2 processing. Uh, and you do that if type 1 processing is failing. You've got a problem, the situation is perceived to be complex, you feel sad or depressed. You first do a root cause analysis. You pay attention to why it is that the problem is there, what was the cause of it, and that usually facilitates coming up with a solution to the problem. Ledoux talked about it as the emotional brain, the subcortical low road, that's the top, and the cortical high road. Kahneman talks about as thinking fast and slow. System 1 is automatic, system 2 is deliberate. And when you get depressed, a lot of energy goes into helping you think in type 2 processing, a slower, more deliberate problem-solving kind of approach. The dorsal raphe, or the raphe nucleus, is going to play a critical role here. All of the neurons in the brain that use serotonin as a transmitter have their cell bodies in the dorsal in the raphe nucleus. It's very old. It's very ancient. Been around as long as we've had vertebrates and it had spines. And the dorsal raphe is the particular area of the raphe nucleus that not only projects to the limbic system and the cortex, but that also is responsive to whether or not you have control over the thing that you're confronting. That's going to be important in a couple of minutes. So hang on to that. But when the dorsal raphe nucleus fires, it projects to the amygdala that directs your attention towards whatever the problem was that got you distressed. It projects to the hippocampus that allocates working memory, which is very energetically expensive. It takes a lot of energy, and the hippocampus is going to be burning a lot of sugars to do that for you. It's also going to turn down BDNF signal, and BDNF is the brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It's kind of the fertilizer of the brain that helps you build additional connections between synapses. You don't need to do that at the moment. It projects to the lateral prefrontal cortex. It makes you resistant to distraction, and it allows you to really focus on analyzing the problem. And it's good when, if you're going to be doing that, that you have a lot of working memory devoted to that in the hippocampus. It projects the nucleus accumbens, but there it turns it down. And the nucleus accumbens is the primary source of dopaminergic tract dopaminergic neurons that drive an interest in things that get you pursuing appetitive pursuits like food and sex. Basically, what it does is it produces anhedonia and it projects at the hypothalamus. And there it turns down growth, it turns down reproduction, it turns down physical activity. You've got a problem to solve. You don't need to be doing all of those other things. Do that when you're in a better mood. Now, notice on the far right, I've got two arrows pointing towards conservation withdrawal. It probably is the case that the earlier evolved adaptation for most organisms before while they were still relatively primitive, was conservation withdrawal. It gives you everything we saw in sickness a couple of minutes ago, the pulling into the self, the lack of pursuit of pleasures, etc. Um, Even mollusks go through conservation withdrawal. So the upper two boxes to the right predate vertebrates. However, the three on the left don't. They probably require a more highly developed, a more highly evolved brain. Certainly, humans have it. Certainly, primates have it. Certainly, rodents have it. And best we can tell, most of the vertebrates tested have it. And goodness only knows what you want to say about octopi, but they can probably do virtually anything we can do, and they can do it with 8 arms. Lower left side, in melancholia, Andrew's term for depression, the energy is funneled into rumination, resistance to distraction, away from growth and hedonic pursuits, classic symptoms of depression. On the far right, lower right, it serves to keep your attention focused on complex social problems, whatever it was that caused the problem in the first place, until a solution is found. And then the question becomes, if indeed that's part of what's going on, what in our ancestral past was the kind of complex social problem that would require thoughtful attention? One thing that's a very viable candidate is social ostracism. We know from studies of primates in modern life that one of the things you can't afford to do if you're a baboon, a chimp, et cetera, is to be ostracized from the troop. That would likely be fatal. You're going to get picked off by predators, or you're going to starve to death. Most young primates caring for an infant can't gather enough food to feed herself and the infant. You need at the least some other adult primates around to help you do that. And the cost, the evolutionary cost to mothers caring for babies, and particularly young adolescent mothers caring for babies, would be twice that for males. The inclusive fitness, and I'll just mention inclusive fitness is what I've come to learn is the major advance in evolutionary theory over the last century. In the old days, when Darwin was operating, the notion was it was survival of the fittest. Things evolved if it benefited the individual. What we now learned is that it's not just survival of the fittest, it's survival of the fittest gene line. In what passes for humor among evolutionary biologists, JBS Haldane once said, "I would not give my life for one brother, but I would for two brothers or 8 cousins." What that means is if in the complex calculation you have biological relatives that are more likely to reproduce than you are, your species is better served by you sacrificing yourself for their benefit. Um, Interesting notion. Now, we know a couple of other things about depression, and this holds for all depressions, although, again, most depressions are unipolar and don't involve hypomania or mania. Bipolar depression is highly heritable, about 80% heritability, about as heritable as schizophrenia is. It's very low prevalence, about 1 to 2% of the population, maybe gets up to 3 to 4 if you include bipolar 2, people that speak very rapidly and have exaggerated opinions of themselves. I don't know who we're talking about here. But unipolar, either one, you get a major increase in incidence in early adolescence. And the bulk of those cases are female. This is a large meta-analysis done by Salk and colleagues. Lynn Abramson was the senior author on this. They called all the reports of either diagnosable depression on the left or measures of depressive symptoms on the right around the world, samples over about 150 to 180 samples in each of the respective slides, over 1.5 million, close to 2 million people on each of the sides, about half of them female. And what you see is the differential, the disparity between women and men. We're starting in early adolescence on. The incidence in girls just jumps like crazy. It also goes up in boys, but it goes up about 2 to 3 times more in young women, early teens in particular, and it never drops below about a 2-to-1 ratio throughout the rest of the lifespan. Whatever is going on with the depression, it's going on a lot more often in girls than in boys, and a lot more often in women than in men. And again, there's got to be a reason for that. It explodes early adolescence, and that's when we get the onset of reproductive capability. We keep thinking that that kind of distribution, which is unusual for a disease. Most diseases either kill you when you're an infant or they kill you when you're up old enough for Medicare. It's unusual to have something that has its primary onset during adolescence. That's usually the healthiest period of time. And that's when the disparity between the sexes first emerges and it then stays elevated across the lifespan. One other thing to mention with bipolar disorder, there is no gender, no sex disparity. And again, you got to wonder what's going on there. The depressions in unipolar and bipolar depression are so virtually identical. However, the huge difference in genetic liability, the huge difference in prevalence, the huge difference in gender disparity make you think that whatever's going on in bipolar depression, it ain't the same animal as unipolar depression. And if I were to hazard a guess, my guess is the bipolar disorder is what you get whenever the mechanisms are that evolve to subserve unipolar disorder break down. And in that case, they can go in either direction.
Hey, Dr. Hollon,
Yes, please.
you have a question in the chat or
Great.
in the meeting.
Can you, if it's in the chat, can you read it for me? Or ask it?
Sorry, it's not in the. Is this echoing at all? Should I? Okay, wait. I'm gonna step out so that it's not echoing.
I
But
can hear you go. I don't know if anybody else can, but I have a question. Great.
yeah, so I wanted to specifically ask about cortisol profiles. So I know that you're saying that in depression there are very typically elevated levels of cortisol, but in adolescent girls we see that there are sometimes profiles and internalizing symptoms that they have lower peaking cortisol in response to stressor.
Uh,
So I sort of wanted to know more about that, if there's some sort of like explanation in terms of like biology that perhaps you can think of or that you have more insight of.
Yeah, I can claim no particular insight there, and I wasn't even aware that that was the case. I'll go ahead and make something up anyway because it's never stopped me much. One of the things I'd want to know first is that a difference in elevation or basal levels in the first place? If you're already a bit elevated, you can't go up that much more. The other thing is maybe a blunting of that, and if so, I couldn't begin to explain that. I don't know. I don't know where that's going. I wasn't even aware that that was going on.
Mhm. Okay, yeah, like there are like a lot of different ideas of like how cortisol levels differ in adolescent girls with internalizing symptoms.
Mhm.
Um, and I suppose there's a lot to do with uh there's not a lot to do with like how the biology of this is preceding perhaps like interpersonal stress. A lot of it is kind of looking at instead how there's some sort of environmental stressor that contributes to the
Mhm.
response. So like some of what I'm interested in is stuff like this where we can see how there is perhaps a biological profile that contributes to the the um showing up symptoms.
Oh, that's marvelous. Again, I'd look to you to come up with answers in that area because it's something I don't know that much of. Just a couple of other things. I understand that girls tend to ruminate more than boys do to begin with. I also understand that girls, particularly once they get into adolescence, tend to be, number one, a bit more mature and mature a bit more rapid, but also tend to be more concerned about other people, relationships, whatever. That tends to be part of it. And I can imagine any of that driving cortisol, whether or not, who knows what the direction of causality is. I don't, but you might. But yeah, there's something interesting going on that would be great to unravel.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially the frequency of co-rumination as well, like being frequent among
Yeah.
girls especially, and we see it kind of changing as we have a digital environment as well. We sort of see that salience even online.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I will let you continue.
Well,
I
yeah.
have, I have a lot of insight. I have a lot of
Well,
insight
yeah,
to
I
give.
bet you could have a lot to share. Do one more thing for us, please. Would you let people know what you mean by co-rumination?
Oh yeah, so it has to do with sort of a process between two people. One person is kind of ruminating on their issues out loud to another person, so they both share in like this sort of depressive state.
Yep. Want to attribute that to one gender? It happen any more often in one gender than the other?
Yeah, it's more often in women especially like in adolescent girls.
When I was a 14-year-old adolescent, I had things going on inside my head. Maybe, I'm not sure, but I never talked about them with my friends. We went and did things. My guess is most 14-year-old girls spend a lot of time talking with their friends about things, and co-rumination might be the way, one of the things that's one of the processes that comes out of that. It's interesting. My wife, Judy Garber, is a developmental psychopathologist, and years ago, 10 years ago now, she was doing a preventative trial, and I've joined her for one or two of the groups. And we would have a range of adolescents from 13 on through 18 would be in the group. And the 14-year-old boys didn't say virtually anything unless they were talking to one of the 16 or 17-year-old girls. Them they would talk with, and it was the older girl that would draw them out. But the boys didn't talk. They didn't talk with one another. The girls talked all the time. It was a big difference. And who knows? I don't know if it only holds in Nashville, but my hunch it's more common across the sexes.
I think there's a socialization aspect at play, especially. I think kind of as you had suggested, when men or boys are prompted to kind of share in that experience, or kind of are prompted to share emotional experience, then I do think that it happens. But it's not often among boys that they will feel
Yeah,
like they
yeah,
have that sort of
yeah.
that sort of inclination to do so.
Right. It's not the first impulse that they have, and it may need some processing. Lovely. I appreciate that. Anything else before I go on? Just
Um, I mean, okay, I have one more thing.
please.
So a lot of there's a lot of controversy, of course, in how diagnosis is done. So there's a lot of people who advocate for diagnosis in terms of being informed by biological components. And so there's also a lot of consideration on whether we should have diagnostic criteria that is more geared towards utility or that is more just valid. So I guess I wonder kind of what your stance is on like what diagnostic criteria should look like, if there should be more of a biological component in how clinicians sort of approach the diagnostics of mental health disorders.
Yeah, very, very quickly, I'd say I think most diagnoses is a waste of time. I think that DSM, I trained on it, followed it, et cetera, it's gotten much larger over the years. And I'm always struck by the fact that anybody that oversees the current revision of DSM then is one of the strongest critics after they step down from that kind of role. I think it's got too.
Like Alan Francis,
Yeah,
especially, right?
he's a
Yeah.
great example of that. And people like Wakefield usually ends up in conversation with whoever was the last person that revised DSM. I do think there are true diseases. And again, I think something like Cushing's disease is a good example of that. I do think that happens, but I think the majority of the things we see, the non-psychotic disorders that we see, are not disorders. I think they are variations on personality, style, et cetera, and shaping and the like. And it might be useful utilitarian to think in terms of categorizing those things. We can categorize introversion, extroversion, but I wouldn't necessarily consider being an introvert or an extrovert a diagnostic category.
Mhm. Right. So you're less so thinking of it as like there's necessarily something wrong, but there are just different ways in which people kind of are different like personality organizations that exist,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
what?
and viva la differences. Who's the great Steve Sumi, the primate researcher, the Harry Harlow protege? I heard giving a talk about 20 years ago. He pointed out that among the species, the most polymorphically perverse species are the most flexible and adaptable. Among the rodents, it's the Norway rat. Among primates, it's rhesus monkeys, and among the great apes, it's human beings. And because we have that great deal of variability across the species, lots of different possibilities for polymorphisms, we can survive in a lot of different environments. Not any given individual survives in all environments, but somebody will survive someplace. And my goodness, having spent time in Philadelphia, I mean, if you can survive in the Crucible, you can survive anywhere.
All
Let
right.
Lovely. Let me go on just to say a couple of things to hold this down. I'm going to go one more thing about helplessness, and we'll probably wrap it up there if we only have the hour. The notion that rumination is a problem, if you look up rumination in a regular dictionary, it's defined as thinking carefully, long and hard about something. If you look at a medical dictionary, it's thinking in a circular fashion that doesn't get you anywhere. It's clinicians that are given rumination bad name. Different depressive syndromes reflect the differential allocation of energy. We went through that, the sickness, starvation, and melancholia. And the energy we know goes to the cortex when you're depressed. The notion that depression impairs cognitive executive functions. Yeah, if you want to ask people to think about things that aren't their problem, get them to think about the problem, they do much better than other people do. And we know that most episodes of depression remit spontaneously. In our ancestral past, that had to be the case. So we got to have something which is a closed system, which means that whatever triggers the problem is got to be able to work itself out over time, whether that's like a ripple in a biological pond that goes back to stasis, or whether that's a closed system where you first start by focusing on what the problem is, and then it facilitates coming up with a solution. We don't know that, but we do know that spontaneous remission is the sine qua non in clinical depression. If I'm not wild about heights or spiders, 30 years later, I'm not wild about heights or spiders. It's situational, not episodic. In depression, it's episodic if you have multiple episodes, but almost all episodes resolve spontaneously, even if we don't treat them. But let me finish up here for this hour, talking about learned helplessness. And I did my original dissertation on helplessness. I was really, was about to drop out of graduate school because I was bored to tears looking at scatter on the WACE intelligence test until my advisor gave me a preprint of an article written by Marty Seligman. Nobody knew who he was yet, but it was an article on the studies he was doing with Steve Mayer in stress in animals. And for the last 50 years, 45 years, we've had the notion that if you expose animals to uncontrollable stressors, they learn to become helpless. We thought of that as a model for depression in humans. Well, about 10 years ago, 2016, Mayer and Seligman did a major retraction published in Psych Review. And what they basically said was, what we saw, what we called learned helplessness, we were wrong about. It wasn't that animals learn to be helpless. If they're exposed to uncontrollable stressors, that's just the species' typical response to things, bad things happening that you can't control. What is the interesting thing that gets learned is if you expose them to controllable stressors, they learn they have control. They learn to be resilient, and that protects them in future high-risk, stressful situations. This is the classic helplessness design. You've got an animal on the far right, labeled control. It's in the box. It's got a wheel, but its tail not attached to the electrode. It doesn't get shocked. The animal on the far left, same box. It gets shocked unpredictably, periodically, but it can turn the wheel to turn off the shock. The animal in the middle is yoked to the animal on the left. It gets exactly the same shocks, exactly the same duration, exactly the same intensity, and they go off when the animal on the left turns it off. The only difference between the animal that can escape and the animal that's yoked is the animal is psychological. It's not physical in the stimuli. On the far right, you see the rat in the box. What they did, largely coming out of Steve Mayer's labs, when they first developed helplessness, Steve burrowed deeper into neurobiology, and Marty went Hollywood and went clinical. And what Steve Mayer and colleagues picked up over the subsequent decades was that in the dorsal raphe nucleus, and we saw that a little while ago, that's the area of the brain that projects, not the only area of the raphe nucleus, but the primary area of the raphe nucleus that projects to the limbic system and the cortex. When it's projected, and the organism, the rat in this case, or humans we now have good reason to believe, detects that if you control the outcome, what's an animal on the left that can escape, the ventral medial prefrontal cortex picks that up and has a descending pathway glutamatergic to the dorsal raphe, in which it synapses on a GABA. Glutamine is always excitatory, GABA is always inhibitory, and when the excitatory neurons, glutamine neuron synapses on the GABA neuron, which is inhibitory, the GABA neuron that inhibits the serotonergic neurons from firing. In a sense, you shut down the stress response driven by the dorsal raphe. The reason why Mayer and colleagues came to believe that it was not the brainstem, the dorsal raphe or the raphe nucleus that detects controls, it's simply too small. If you look on the right and the white, the middle, dorsal raphe is too small. It's only got about 30,000 neurons. The prefrontal cortex, the neuron, has a whole lot more, exponentially more. And what an organism has to do to pick up on control is detect the difference between what happens to it if it makes a response versus if it doesn't. And that's the P of an outcome. The probability of an outcome given a response is different from the probability of an outcome given the absence of that response. And it works whether it's an active response or a passive response, as long as it's a differential behavior. The raphe nucleus is too primitive to detect that. The cortex is not. The cortex picks it up and the cortex signals back. Now, this wouldn't be the first time that we see a more highly evolved region of the brain overriding a more basic or primitive function. The brainstem evolved, does a number of marvelous things, keeps us alive, keeps us breathing, keeps the heart beating, etc. But it's not large, it's not sensitive, it's not evolved enough, not got enough neurons to pick up whether or not you got control. If you have control, the cortex then turns down the brainstem. Up at the top, we have learned resilience, not learned helplessness. What gets learned, the cortex overrides the species typical response coming out of the brainstem. That's Mayer and Seligman in 2016. We went through the yellow, the descending glutamatergic neurons. It's not helplessness that's learned, it's resilience that's learned. And it tends to protect organisms, rodents, etc., probably humans, in subsequent stressful situations. There's an immunization effect that goes with it. And the immunization effect, if you look on the far left, we have a series of rats that Mayer and colleagues are going to expose either to escapable stressors, that's ES, or inescapable stressors, or home cage. And they're going to do that 7 days earlier. Then they're going to put them in a subsequent situation, IS at the top, where everybody gets exposed to inescapable stress. And we're going to be monitoring the serotonin levels that is the dorsal raphe firing and innervating the limbic system of the cortex. It turns out if your home cage in escapable stress 7 days ago, the dorsal raphe lights up, the limbic system gets activated, the cortex gets activated, you get all the symptoms of depression. If you had experience with control 7 days earlier, which is a long time in the life of a rat, you see you get a little bit of an increment in serotonin levels, and then it comes right back down. That's the protective effect, and it holds up over time. Very good reason to believe it's neuroplasticity. Think of the old Hebbian dictum that neurons have to fire together to wire together. When neurons wire together, they start to build additional synaptic interactions, and you can builds in a system where what you've learned in the past influences the way you respond in the future. And it looks like that's indeed part of what's going on here. The curious thing about this is it only works in male rats, and we don't understand that, why that's the case. Mayer and colleagues, Nakaprad, et cetera, they know it, they don't understand it. On the right-hand side, we have dopamine, and at the top, it's escapable shock. Below it, the escapable shock is inescapable shock, and it's divided between male and female rats. And escapable at the top, or home cage control, and male and female rats inescapable. And what you see at the top is that when rats get shocked, for the male rats, the dopamine starts to go up and it comes back down. For the female rats, it goes up and stays up. When the dopamine goes up to escapable shock, essentially that takes the prefrontal cortex offline. And rats or humans, any vertebrate, can learn things in at least two ways. It can learn using goal-directed learning, which is sensitive to the contingency and the value of the outcome, or it can learn by habit, which is probably the way a lot of addictions get generated, or we can move from goal-directed to habit learning. And the problem for the female rodents is that you got to learn it via goal-directed learning in order to have that immunization effect for it to protect you in the future. They learn the response, they learn to turn the wheel, they learn to escape in the first task, but it doesn't benefit them, doesn't make them resilient in subsequent tasks. Now, we have no way of knowing yet if anything like goes on in humans. I would be surprised necessarily if it does, but we do know that the rate of onset in human females is about 2 to 3 times that in males starting in early adolescence. And maybe there'll be something going along that line. It's the kind of thing we want to explore. Notice on the far left, we've got norepinephrine. That's the third of those biogenic amines. Basically comes out of the locus ceruleus, another set of nuclei deep in the brainstem. And that goes up regardless of whether you get exposed to escapable or inescapable shock in both genders, and it stays up. The basic efflux of cortisol, with all that it does, goes up in both genders. Dopamine doesn't. And when the dopamine goes up in females but not in males, the male gets the benefit of suppressing the serotonin response that drives the depressive symptom. The females don't. Interesting. Bottom line here is that what I've thought for the last 40 years, that animals learn to be helpless when exposed to uncontrollable stressors. Mayer and Seligman have shown us is not true. It's not helpless, it gets learned, it's resilience. Learning takes place in the cortex, not in the brain stem. And when it does, it immunizes against future stressors. Learned resilience may well be a model for stress response in humans. Learned resilience is, by the way, it doesn't make the rodents more aggressive, it makes them more persistent. If at first you don't succeed, you keep trying until you figure something out that works. And it's also the case that animals that are exposed to uncontrollable stressors don't become amotivated, they don't give up. What they're doing is looking for more complicated solutions. The easy stuff doesn't work. And if you give them a more complicated problem to solve, they do better at that than animals that are exposed to uncontrollable stressors. And that would be wholly consistent with Andrew's notion about depression subserving problem solving. I stop here at this point because I think we're out of time. I got two more things I can show you, but maybe I come back another time if you guys are interested. Let me stop here. Any thoughts, questions, other comments people want to raise?
You can continue. Sorry, my echo is coming. Hold on just one second.
I have a question just on what you just covered. So the wiring together, firing together, is an argument. Other people have offered that as an argument in favor of kindling,
Yep.
which you debunked with the Dunedin stuff. And so help me reconcile those.
Well, wiring together, firing together, the notion of plasticity may be one of the explanations for kindling. And I do think I would go quite so far as to say I debunk, but at least the data in the birth cohort studies are not consistent with what you would expect from kindling. But the fact that kindling may or may not probably doesn't occur doesn't mean that plasticity doesn't occur. We know that's a very basic of wiring in the brain. So plasticity uber alles, kindling probably not. Get you close. Again, I can go all night. You guys tell me when you want me to stop.
We have a question real quick.
Yes, please.
Hello.
Hello.
So my question for you is, you structured the talk in a very specific way, and I've never seen a talk structured this way. So I'm curious to know why you set it up this way, because I like how you did it. So you set it up as what you got wrong initially, and then you kind of walked through the steps of your whole research process.
Yeah.
Why did you structure it like that, and how did you come to the conclusion to structure it like that?
Yeah. I think always in a talk or a paper, you want to tell a story. And I think that's the story I find most compelling. So I'm going to share this stuff with other people. I'm going to share with them the journey, how I walked through going from things that I believe very firmly that I was taught by people I've respected a great deal. But then to watch people like Mayer and Seligman and others totally turn things on their head. Again, if it's just Andrews, the evolutionary biologist, I mean, what the hell, who's an evolutionary biologist? Although I think the guy's superb. But when the people that have been icons for me for the last 40 years say, we got it wrong, then I think I want to pay attention to that. And keep in mind, I remember Marty Seligman always used to say, and I always appreciated that, is that the goal in science is not to start right, it's to get right. And we go back and forth. We have notions, we test them. Sometimes they hold up, sometimes they don't. We then refine our notions based on what the data show. If that holds up, then great. If not, then we refine the notion further. And always in, I mean, you always want to go to the data. The facts, the data don't interpret themselves, but your development of the notions, the theses do evolve over time, much like human brain and function evolved over time. So for me, it was just the best way to tell the story. The other thing I'll say, as I've always heard from a colleague, I kind of fell into an academic position, never expected that, but I fell in an academic position and had to scramble to try to figure out what I was supposed to do. And what I've always heard department chairs say, well, it's a good thing you get a chance to teach because it makes your science better. It's a good thing you get if you're a clinician, good thing you get a chance to do practice because it makes your teaching better, makes your science better, et cetera. In this case, I think it actually worked for me. And I think that I've been teaching an undergraduate class the last about 6-8 years on depression. And the more I've been structured around the things I've been wrong about, the more the undergraduates like it. And I can walk there and tell a story. And I got slides set up like this, so I don't have to remember anything. So it's you get older, you start losing capacity to recall. This way, I don't have to recall anything. It's all sitting right there. Does that get you close?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Pleasure.
It's a wicked cool way of approaching it too, because as it's the opposite of being like I am the great, and here's the it's disarming, it's charming, and it makes everyone curious. It's like
Yeah.
a Jedi mind trick. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, take a look at who my primary mentors were. Tim Beck was my primary mentor, who was in his 50s before he decided that dynamic approaches, which he was thoroughly invested in, just didn't work. They weren't consistent with what he was hearing from his patients. They weren't consistent with the couple of early psychopathology experiments they did. He couldn't find evidence for anger turned inward in the dream content of his patients or the free associations. And he describes almost the scales following the eyes one time. He's sitting in the session and he's got a client who's looking a little perplexed. So he's sitting, as most analysts, a little further away. He can see her, she can't see him. She's got a perplexed look on her face, and he asked her, "What's troubling you?" And he expected to hear something that was going to be cut to the case, the chase psychodynamically. He said, "I think I'm boring you." He said, "What?" Yeah, she said, "I think I'm boring you." And it occurred to him that when depressed clients would tell him all the things that were wrong with them, those weren't screens for sexual or aggressive drives. That's what they actually believed. And once he did that epiphany, and once he did walked across the street to psychology and worked with colleagues where they arranged success or failure experiences. And if you have somebody who's not depressed, the way to get them to work harder is set it up so they fail. If you got somebody who's depressed, the way to get them to work harder is set it up so they succeed. And he began to think, maybe what we'll be doing is helping people test, is it really true that I'm inadequate, unlovable, incompetent, et cetera? And if they start to find those things aren't necessarily true, then more power to them. That may be the way out. So I didn't see it, I wasn't there, but I heard Tim Beck turn his whole approach on its head. He got sort of drummed out of the Philadelphia Psychoanalytic Society. He had 5 kids. He wasn't tenured in psychiatry. He thought it was the end of his career, but it kind of worked out for him. I see Marty Seligman, Steve Mayer say things that got us famous. We were wrong about. I mean, you look at your mentors, you look at what they're doing, say, now that's the kind of thing I want to do, or at least that's the kind of thing I want to be willing to do. So yeah. Now, I'll just very quickly summarize things I could tell you about if you wanted, either keep going today or come back some other time, or just send you to the readings, is that the notion that we have about how antidepressant works is just dead wrong. It's not that they redress an excess of a deficit of serotonin in the brain. It's actually an excess, and they drive it about 4 times higher than anything you find in nature. However, when you do that, the homeostatic mechanisms kick in. They suppress synthesis of serotonin. They reduce sensitivity postsynaptically. So essentially, it's like holding up a match to a thermostat to turn the furnace down. Now, that would be fine. It would be all right that we misunderstand how these things work, except that probably when you're doing that, you're locking the underlying homeostatic mechanisms in place. And what that means is at any point that you stop the medications, people are going to still be in episode and elevated risk for relapse. So we may be inadvertently creating a need for medications that doesn't exist in nature. And because these things are probably going to end on their own. The second thing is I've always thought about cognitive therapy as helping correct inaccurate beliefs and flawed information processing. And I think there's some element of that. However, as Paul Andrews points out, we rely a lot on our clients, our patients, thinking long and hard about stuff. Cognitive therapy itself is a demanding therapeutic intervention. If they couldn't think, they couldn't do it. And what I now think we're doing is helping the occasional patient that gets stuck, because only about maybe 10 to 15% of the people in the population end up being in therapy. The majority, the depression remits spontaneously. Most of them, they're not going to come back. I think what we're basically helping people do is learn to ruminate more efficiently. So I've changed around how I'm thinking about that as well. But that's basically it. Those are the last 2 things in a nutshell.
Well, thank you,
Now I got the echo.
Dr. Hollon, for coming here today for our speaker series for HGAPS. Your work is very interesting. I'm going to go ahead and share the QR code for the CLE event to everyone. But if you want to stick around and answer questions, or if you want to continue, that's fine.
Yep.
We loved having you.
More than happy. Thank you much. And again, I show up at family gatherings with slides, so this was great for me.
I was muted so you couldn't hear the popping noises. My mind was blown a couple times.
You're too kind.
I have a further thought about some of the narratives that we hear about post-traumatic stress disorder. Sort of the idea that being exposed to stressor and being unable to flee or at least escape that situation contributes to the symptoms of PTSD. And that is like forwarded by like Dr. Bessel van der Kolk and people like that. So I wanted to know um sort of the thoughts on that. Like I know PTSD is different from the mechanisms of depression. However, it still is relevant to sort of the resilience aspect that you're speaking about.
Yeah, yeah. I have a couple things. And I've read a few. I've not met, but I've read a few things by Dr. van der Kolk, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. It's much more psychodynamic in its orientation, and I don't think he's right. The person I would pay most attention to is either somebody locally to you guys, Patty Rezick, and Anke Ehlers. And Anke I know best, and Anke would say, look, the biggest problem in PTSD is something really awful happens to you, and that's a terrible thing that you wouldn't want that happen to anybody. However, the big problem is they have difficulty distinguishing between that was then, this is now. And it starts having flashback, other kind of things when when their resistance, when their energy level starts to go down. What both Patty and Anka would say is the main thing, or that's coming out of NFO as well, the main thing you want to do is help them relive the experience and put it in perspective. And I don't think van der Kolk would say that. I don't think most clinicians in the field would say that. We did first of our, I was fortunate to be the chair of the American Psychological Association's advisory committee on developing clinical practice guidelines, and that was back in the late teens. And one of the first guidelines we developed was on on trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder. And they a whole range of experts from different disciplines, different orientations, reviewed the evidence, and the evidence is pretty good for three things. It's either exposure or exposure or exposure. It's either NFO is prolonged exposure, which scares the hell out of me, or it's Patty Rezick's cognitive processing therapy, or it's Anke Ehler's cognitive therapy. And the one thing you see with both Patty and Anke's approaches is much lower attrition rates. Every bit as effective as prolonged exposure, but more people are willing to stay with it because it's not quite as brutal. The other thing from Anke that I've seen and heard, and by the way, if you haven't seen the Anke and her partner David Clark put up training vignettes on the Oxcart training site. They're free, they're available. They're reproduction of maybe 5 to 8 minutes of different segments of therapy. And you can follow the course of how David would treat social anxiety or Anke would treat PTSD. Best training tapes I've seen. I use those in my graduate teaching courses. At any rate, what Anke would say is that you don't have to go relive the experience all that often, but when you get the person in the midst of the experience, it's really hot, it's really affectively salient, then you want to ask them what it means. You let them describe and retail, they get themselves back in the midst of it. And a couple of times I've done it with a client. I walk out kind of shaken, and I can understand what it's like to live with that. But in the midst of it, you got to ask them to pay attention to what it means. And the couple of times I've done it, people come up with things that I couldn't have guessed or couldn't have imagined. I had one client that I described in the revision of the cognitive therapy of depression manual, who had victim of sexual trauma in her teens and had concluded that she was absolutely unlovable, that nobody she ever wanted to be close to would want to have a relationship with her. And the additional thing that she started doing, she never quite fully understood, she would tear up anybody she got in a relationship with. She would be demanding, arbitrary, would want things but not ask for them, and they get pissed off and go on the attack if they didn't get them. And it kind of turned out when we went through the reliving experience that for her was almost like a safety behavior. That was the way she protected herself from getting rejected. if somebody ever found out what actually happened to her. Now, the thing that just as for anxiety disorders, the thing that's going to be most helpful for her is to relive the experience and then do the thing that she's most afraid of doing. It's the kind of thing that Marshall Linehan would call opposite action. And it took about 4 to 6 months to get her up to the point she was willing to do that. When she finally did, her current boyfriend said, I'm sorry that happened to you. It's like I hit by a bus, but that make any difference to me. You like me, I like you. What do I care? I mean, I'm sorry it happened to you back at age 15, but it doesn't have any impact on any way I feel about you. That for her was a revelation. Wouldn't have gotten, there's no amount of persuasion I could have used in the session that would have gotten her to what it was like to open up, share with somebody she cared about, and have that person totally unconcerned about it. Meant the same things to her that it did. Anka would describe that as kind of the critical thing. I was at a conference in Glasgow, probably about 10 years ago, and Anka was giving a keynote. And it's a large auditorium and amphitheater sitting, and I'm up in the back. And she's a brilliant program of research developed across. She's talking about all the work that they're doing. And after about the 45-minute presentation, she stops and invites questions from the audience. And it's an English-British audience. Nobody's saying a damn word. So after I gave it about a minute or two to make sure I wasn't getting anybody's way, and I raised a hand. And I said, I'm struck, Anka. You've been talking for close to an hour. You never mentioned the term relapse. What do you guys do about this? They said, well, we don't get it. I said, what? In depression, most of what we're doing is trying to help people who are perhaps prone to depression not relapse in the future. And you mean, well, I mean, somebody can be traumatized again, but they don't have a relapse into the old trauma. And it was amazing to me. Bottom line, I think from I'm at ABCT about a year later, riding up the escalator just by happenstance behind Patty Resnick. And I'd asked Patty the same question. He said, well, we don't get it. And when you get two different people on two sides of the ocean saying the same thing in a way that I would not have predicted, there's something different going on there. So who knows where that goes, but I'd love to see people with interest in depression, people with interest in PTSD work out the issue there, because there's something special. Does that get you close?
Oh yeah, for sure. No, that is interesting. You mentioned Marsha Linehan. And I sort of see like her conception of dialectical behavioral therapy to sort of be a little bit similar, I think, in what you were referring to in cognitive therapies, that they have a little bit of a difficulty with rumination, or at least like the idea of she has a radical acceptance, and I kind of wonder, like, it's not really the same thing as going out and actually exposing yourself to the stressor again, or actually doing the thing again. So I don't know. So do you think like generally this sort of uh kind of cognitive reshaping is not as kind of beneficial as like the action of doing so or putting yourself in the situation?
Yeah. I think the single most effective thing you can do is run an experiment in which you alter your behavior to do the thing you're most afraid to do. Uh, now, Marcia has a marvelous principle she calls opposite action. And for clients, most of them meet criterion for borderline disorder, they screw up so much, so often, so frequently. Usually the best guide for them is whatever you think your impulse is at the moment, do the opposite, which is where that comes from. But it holds as well. If I've got somebody who's afraid of heights or afraid of bridges, etc., the best thing they can do is get themselves in that situation and find out that they don't jump and they don't die. If I got somebody like my client who's afraid that if she reveals a major trauma in her past to somebody she's beginning to care about, they will reject her. For her, the best experiment for her to run is to open up, let herself be vulnerable and see what happens. And it worked out very well for her. Just a little bit of a prelude. It took us months to lead up to that. One of the things she had me do was to do a poll of young male soccer coaches. And in those days, my son was playing youth soccer, and in the wintertime in youth soccer, you go indoors. The problem in the middle part of the United States, and I imagine Carolina's like that, is none of the parents ever grew up playing soccer. We didn't know how to do it. But we would hire these graduate students from Italy, from Spain, from France, et cetera, to coach our kids' teams. So in any of those indoor tournaments, the kids will be playing for 20 minutes at a time for the next 3 hours, going to be sitting around with a bunch of other kids and a bunch of these foreign coaches, highly desirable young adults. She had me poll them. What she did was wrote out a paragraph of what happened to her, then a series of questions she wanted answered. And she was convinced that everybody that I asked would tell her, no, no way I would get involved with somebody like that. Well, it turned out about the dozen or so people coaches I interviewed, a couple of them said, look, I'm sorry, she may be a very nice person, but it sounds like trouble to me. I don't think I'd want to get involved. Most of them said, what do I care? I'm sorry that happened to her, but it's like she got hit by a car. If I like her and she likes me, what's the problem? And a couple of said, is she pretty? I said, yeah, very. They wanted her phone number, which of course I didn't do. She was totally surprised. That helped her get to the point where she was going to take the chance dealing with a boyfriend. It's a really scary thing. I think it's analogous. We'll talk about compensatory strategies. Those are the things that the strategies people involve to protect themselves from the things that are afraid are going to happen. It's not so prominent in depression per se. It's very prominent in anxiety disorders. And what David Clark or Anka Ehlers, Clark with social anxiety, or Ehlers with PTSD would say, or in this case with my client who would have met criteria for borderline personality, would say is the single most powerful experiment to run is to do the thing you're most afraid of doing. And if you survive it, then what's the point of having been afraid about it in the first place? We'll set the stage with some cognitive restructuring. We'll set the stage looking at the beliefs, digital kind of evidence is a good prelude to that. But to my mind, as much of our time we spend helping the client get ready to do this stuff, it's when they actually step off and find that they can, and they jump into the water, they find they can swim, that really the therapy takes off. So I think of I mean, I do cognitive therapy, but I recognize cognitive therapy is really a cognitive behavior therapy, and it's encouraging clients to run experiments in which they test out the things that are most afraid of or they're most reluctant to do, and that's what really I think is a key driving part of therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Close?
Yeah, and something I also think about is that there's a lot of tendency, I guess, in anxiety disorders to, of course, to perform actions that will make anxiety go away, to make things, try to make the physical manifestation of anxiety or sort of quell that fear. And what a lot of it, of course, gets into is the kind of a cycle of they're going to keep doing that action and it's going to keep it can hinder their daily life, daily functioning, and that's kind of like the issue sometimes that I think about is that perhaps there could be some sort of unhealthy dependency that they form with some sort of action that they try or and I don't know. I'm just kind of saying some things that are coming on my mind with this.
Yeah, no, but again, I think you're right on target then. I think that is a problem. Most any of us will prefer to anesthetize distress as opposed to actually dealing with it. That's where drugs and alcohol come in. I'm not opposed to people drinking or using recreational drugs, but just don't do it when you're in a bad mood, anxious or depressed. Do it when you're feeling better, if you're going to do it at all. Again, if you haven't seen the therapy vignettes that David Clark and Anka Ehler have put on their Oxcart site, is absolutely marvelous. They walk you through stages. For example, social anxiety. For David Clark, the big breakthrough came when he found out what it was people were paying attention to it. It's not the person they're interacting with, it's their own internal image of themselves interacting with that person. And it turns out the internal image that people with social anxiety have of themselves is a lot more negative than actually coming across. Even the early sessions, maybe the first or second session, will ask a person to have a spontaneous conversation with somebody they don't know. They'll bring in a clerk or a secretary from outside, and they have them do it two ways, with and without their safety behaviors. And if somebody's prone to social anxiety, they might do things like put their hand over their mouth or not make eye contact, or they'll rehearse in advance, read the newspapers and rehearse a bunch of different things they can say. So at break at the school, they can have some interesting conversation. And those are all the things that make them look strange and odd. And when they engage with somebody with the safety behaviors, they look worse to themselves and they recognize that than they do without the safety behaviors. Say, I've been doing things. I've been whistling to keep the taggers away. There ain't no taggers. And it turns out it's one of the most powerful aspects of the therapy. So yeah, I would very much say in depression, it's usually getting people past the response initiation deficit. It's laying out a strategy for what things would probably be best to do if you wanted to get something accomplished, and then taking one step at a time, in which you find out that you're neither as incompetent nor as unlovable as you thought you were. And something like social anxiety, it's dropping the safe behaviors in panic disorder, which David largely solved back in the mid-'80s. It's as opposed to doing what you can to keep the heart attack from coming, it's doing what you can to bring the heart attack on. If you're still alive 30 minutes later, like most of the folks are, your heart's not at risk. For Anka, it's reliving the experience and then reclaiming your life. And there's a real set of themes that run across all those different disorders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm most fascinated by personally borderline personality disorder and sort of the treatments that come out of there. For example, I really like the work that's coming with mentalization. And sort of the transference focused things from Otto Kernberg as well. I personally find that to be very valuable, but there's less of a focus on the kind of what there's less of a focus on like going and doing behavior, but rather an assessment of one's relationships or the way that one sees themselves in the relationships with others or the way that they interact with others. And borderline, I think, especially is a fascinating condition because of just the way that the way that they see themselves is like they both, it's like they want to come to therapy and then they also suddenly they'll drop out and you never know.
You never know. And sometimes in the same session. Yeah.
And I personally have a lot of future goals or aspirations to kind of specialize in that sort of realm of personality disorders.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great thing to do. I don't know if you know Marsha Linehan's backstory?
Yes, I do.
Gotcha. Okay. Amazing. She and Otto Kernberg were close. And Marsha would say that what they do is not that dissimilar. And sometimes you find across schools, you end up within the given theoretical perspective of working out things that actually end up being a lot like or get to the same place that other schools get to in similar or sometimes quite different ways. So yeah, I think there's a lot to that.
Honestly, I think all roads lead back to sort of the psychoanalysis offshoot. So for sure the work that's being done in psychodynamic. But I'll stop talking you off. I think you have 2 questions in the chat, so get to those.
I also have been trying to find the Oxcart site that you're talking about to drop that in the chat, and Bing has not helped me.
Yeah, Oxcadet. Try
Oxcadet.
Oxcadet. And if none of that, then I'll pop you an email.
Yep.
Did I get you anything?
Yeah, that did.
There you go. I mean, I think it'd been a lot better if David and Anka called it Oxcart. That way I would remember it more easily. But
yeah.
What the hell?
Excellent. All right, beautiful.
Please
I'll
drop
drop it
that in the chat. Great. Yes.
And Karasi had a pair of questions.
Okay, please. I see 22 comments in the chat.
Sorry, I was on. Oh, so my first question was if you have any specific, and also I just want to disclaim, I am not a psych major. I'm just here because I'm curious and a little bit nosy. So, thank you for letting me join the call. But do you have any like specific ideas of how people can ruminate more efficiently outside of therapy? Because I know that, in my own personal sessions, rumination is like you bounce the idea off of the therapist. Whereas if I do it with a friend, it tends to just kind of like you said, like spiral, and you're just kind of in that depressive state with each other.
Yeah, I do, whether or not they're actually useful, etc. I can't swear to, but this is what I know I do with clients. This is what I try to do with myself. What I want to do is intersperse the negative rumination with a question that I then want to try to answer. And in cognitive therapy, there are 3 questions we make a lot of use of. One is, what's the evidence for that belief? The second is there any alternative explanation other than the first one I just came up with? And the third is, but what are the real implications? For example, if for the client, the architect I was just describing earlier, was convinced that if she ever leveled with a romantic partner, she'd be the person would leave the relationship immediately. The evidence for that is just she assumed that it was true. So we kind of worked our way up to trying to test that more directly. Went closer and closer approximations. The alternative explanation is that explanation might be, for example, another client I worked with, I described in the revision of the manual, a guy who was convinced that he was incompetent because he lost his job teaching in academia about 3 years earlier, and he wasn't teaching in academia anymore. 3 years he'd spent being a handyman at a condominium complex. The problem was he hadn't applied for jobs. They're not going to come find him in his basement. And every time he thought about doing what sculptors do, which is what he was, you put your portfolio together, you take pictures, you send it out, he would get overwhelmed by the size of the task. He essentially was falling prey to a self-fulfilling prophecy. So we don't know how competent he was or not, but he was trying a strategy that wasn't working for him, i.e. do it all at once, as opposed to listing it out, taking it one step at a time, not worrying about where it's going to lead, just one foot after the other. And it worked out fairly nicely for him. The third thing is the implications. Another thing he was quite concerned about is he hadn't paid income taxes for about 3 years. He's been paid black market in cash. He was keeping track of that, but he was afraid at some point the IRS was going to catch up with him, and he didn't like the idea of what was going to happen if he got sent off to federal penitentiary. About 40-year-old, long-haired, looked like he stepped out of Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco in the 60s. So we used the same kind of strategy that we first had him use to get out to see a Picasso exhibit with his wife, that he then used to get his portfolio put together. And that was to not try to do it all at once, but to take a little piece of his records, bring them upstairs, put them on the kitchen table on a Sunday morning when he got up early anyway, put them in order, but not try to get the whole thing done at once. He could do a bit at a time, and doing it a bit at a time, after about 2 or 3 Sunday mornings, they had it all put together. Now the question is, what are the real implications? If you go forward to the IRS, are they going to throw you in jail? He didn't know, I didn't know. However, in the old days, so back in the 70s, end of the 70s, they had these things called telephone booths. You guys have probably seen them on Doctor Who, and they do more than just fly through space and time. You could go to a telephone booth, and if you kept your call short, under 3 minutes, you could call anybody. They couldn't trace you. So he went to this was back when I was in Minnesota. He went to a telephone booth in Hennepin County, which is where Minneapolis was, called their IRS office. And what the fellow on the end of the line said is, well, Mr. Smith, whatever your name is, we would prefer not to send you to jail. Our job at the IRS is to get your money to fund the government, not to spend the government's money on funding you. If we send you to jail, it's going to cost us about $25,000 a year to feed and house you. If you come in, you will pay a penalty, but we will not send you to jail. Now, do you go in? I'm not sure I'm ready to go in quite yet. So we went across to Ramsey County, St. Paul, different IRS office, called them, got exactly the same message. Then he went in, then he settled his taxes. Paul Salkofskas, I think, talks about theory A and theory B. And what he means there is theory A is the notion that most folks who are clinically depressed have when they first, or anxiety, et cetera, have when they first come in. If it's depression, it's usually I'm incompetent or I'm unlovable. The sculptor's concern was he was incompetent. The architect who had relationship issues was concerned she was unlovable. But the way they're going about trying to solve their life is keeping them locked in to those beliefs. And what you want to do in theory B is see, is it really that there's something deeply wrong with me? That's a stable trait theory about yourself, or is that you're choosing the wrong strategies? The sculptor was trying to do it all at once and getting overwhelmed to where he didn't even start. The architect was hiding her major concerns, not asking for what she wanted, because she couldn't imagine anybody else would meet her halfway in a relationship. They're getting pissed off when it didn't happen. She'd be unpredictable all over the place. She would have met criterion for borderline personality if she had been bright enough to look up on clinicaltrials.gov, but we were excluding, so she lied about when she came in. If she were willing to drop what for her were the criminal safety behaviors, she could have gotten past that stuff a lot faster, but it'd been a really scary thing for her to do. So yeah, how did I get into that? What was the initial lead that got us into that?
I was asking about ruminating more efficiently, and you gave me some pretty good insights.
Yeah, what I want to do for myself, and by the way, my own couple of 3 episodes of depression back in the early 20s. What I would want to do for myself, for anybody else, is say, look, rather than you go rumination, spiral down the rabbit hole, first automatic negative thought or ruminative thought, then go to one of those 3 questions: evidence, alternatives, implications. rumination, evidence, alternative implication. I want you to go back and forth. And indeed, I want you to continue ruminating, but I want you to go to evaluating the accuracy or the reasonableness or the importance of the thing that you just ruminated about before you go on to the next one. Same, I mean, it's still thinking. And good thing that, according to Andrews, people are really geared up to think very carefully about things because we draw on that a lot. But I want them to intersperse thinking that might lead them down the rabbit hole, thinking that might pull them back out of it again, back and forth.
Thank you. I really appreciate you answering my question. I'm not sure if you guys have a limited amount of time, so I won't ask my second question. So I'll let you guys do what you're doing.
Go
I
ahead
was
and
going to
answer your
double dog
question.
dare you to ask it.
Yeah, you can go ahead and ask it.
Okay, I was wondering, so you talked about how um when there's a problem that triggers depression, it's a matter of solving it. But what happens, I mean, you touched on like the idea of grief, but like say you have something like chronic illness or something that constantly kind of puts you in a depressive state. Do you feel like our like neurobiological systems are able to recognize that this issue is not going to resolve itself, or does it keep like allocating energy towards rumination indefinitely? And is that what like pathological depression is as opposed to adaptive depression?
Oh, yeah, I'm not sure I would draw a distinction between pathological and adaptive, although if you did go down the rabbit hole and didn't have any means or strategy to pull yourself out, it could be. Way back when Beck did a study with people who were diagnosed with terminal cancer and people who were simply clinically depressed. The people who are clinically depressed are more negative than the people diagnosed with terminal cancer. Um, there are things we can't change in our past or in our biology. That doesn't mean that they have to drive what we think, what we feel, and how we go about our business. I can remember I wouldn't want to be in that situation, but if somebody is, well, I can remember being around my mother the weekend that she died, father before he was coming on death, and they were focusing on the quality of the relationships, the people they cared about, etc. They weren't all that terribly depressed. They had pretty much accepted the notion that things were terminal, but they were going about the business of living while they were in the process of dying. And I think you can always do that. You can't change necessarily what's happening to you. If you can, the great if you can. But if you can't, you can change the way it affects you. And you can change the way it affects you by focusing on the things that you care about and pursuing them.
Thank you. I appreciate your response, and thank y'all for letting me ask.
Of course. Anything else you would like to say, Dr. Hollon? It's been amazing having you this evening.
And again, it's Steve, by the way.
Hmm?
Steve, please. Now,
No,
I can't
no.
remember
I
to see
feel
Dr. Holman, see who else is in the room. Yeah,
well, thank you so much for coming.
pleasure.
I want to ask one more thing. Is there any like contact information that you have if we're like ever curious about like speaking to you again? Because I feel like I have
Sure, yeah.
so many things to say.
Yeah. Again, the name I published under, the Stephen T. Hollon, is the lead into my email, that's just Stephen D. Holland at Vanderbilt. And any of the publications, like the what I got wrong about, what I've been wrong about in depression bedside, again, Brett will have that email listed if you can't remember what that is. And if you guys, if you like Paris, I think you're probably the organizer. I'll pop you the copy of the slides, which has the email on it as well, in case that's of interest to you.
Yes,
That'd be
please.
great.
Pleasure, pleasure. It's been great, good fun, and I appreciate it. Again, I do this at family gatherings and people get upset with me, so this has been fun.
It's been amazing. Thank you so much for coming. Does anyone else have any questions in the chat?
Couple suggestions. You might want to get Paul Andrews if you're doing these kind of things. He's a fascinating speaker and fascinating ideas. Anybody out of that neuroscience group, Steve Mayer or Michael Barada, fascinating. And if you're interested in things like PTSD, Anke Ehlers is terrific, social anxiety, David Clark. One other person I didn't mention I have great respect for, Peter Fonagy, is the Anna O. Freud Professor of Psychoanalytic Psychiatry at the Tavistock, the one of the primo psychodynamic thinkers in the field today. And I think he's absolutely marvelous. And he would be fun
Yes,
to have.
absolutely.
Yeah. Just
I love him. He's great.
yeah.
I also I really like Jonathan Shedler as well. If you're familiar with him.
I know
Yeah,
Peter.
he's
Yeah.
big in psychodynamic psychotherapy. He had a very popular or at least like famous paper in 2010 about the efficacy of psychodynamic psychotherapy compared to cognitive behavioral therapy. I think he's brilliant as well. And like I mentioned before with mentalization, of course, I love Dr. Fonage's work.
Lovely, lovely, lovely.
Steve, if we reach out to him, can we say that you suggested?
Sure. Yeah.
Nice.
I'm going to pay him back the money I owe him, but yes, you can say I suggested. Yeah.
Perfect. We'll
gotta be our
strike that
next speaker.
balance.
Lovely.
Well, you just gave us a handful of recommendations for a speaker series, so
Yeah, yeah,
thank you
yeah.
so much.
There's another marvelous, particularly if you guys have psychodynamic bent, there's another marvelous lady who's at in one of these universities in Israel, and I'm going to block on her name. She's very prominent in Society for Psychotherapy Research, very sharp lady, and if I think it, I'll try to pop that on too.
Okay.
Ever run into George Stricker?
Yeah, oh, sure, I know George.
Yeah, when you were talking about different paths getting you to the same place, the Society for Exploration of Psychotherapy Integration.
Yep, 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 yep. I do think that there may be some individual differences in what you like. And I couldn't shut up long enough to do a good job of psychodynamic therapy, but I have colleagues that are very thoughtful and have different style, and for them it fits like a glove. And my hunch, the same thing holds for potential patients and clients. Some things just work better for different people than other things. And yeah, I think the match is more important than the specifics of the approach.
Bruce Wampold agrees.
Yeah, yeah, I know it. Yes, right. Yes, he does. Cool. All righty. You guys have been great. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Zach Cohen, uh, put on your radar. Zach's at University of Arizona and is emerging as a leader in the whole notion of using picking up on individual differences to predict differential responsive treatments. Ellen Dreesen, the former Pim Kuiper student at Radboud University, is doing some great work along that line as well. She and Zach are doing some things together, and they're both terrific. Ione Eswat at USC is doing some really neat stuff with virtual reality as a modem for lay counselors. And then Daisy Singla, Vikram Patel's great protege up at the University of Toronto, is again kind of defining using lay counselors, non-professionally trained counselors for things like perinatal depression and other things. It's one of the great ways we're going to be able to solve some of the big gap between the small number of professionals available and the great need out there for people to have some good interventions. Cool.
Outstanding.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
Thank you so much.
I'll be emailing you later regarding honorarium and stuff, but I'll email about that later.
All good. Thank you. I've never accepted, so I prefer not to. But I mean, if you got a fund, put it to the next one. But great if you email, because that way I'll know where to send the stuff I promised to send.
Okay. Well, thank you
Excellent.
so much.
Take care, guys.
Jen and I send our best to Judy too.
I will indeed, when she wakes up. Take care.
Cheers.